Welcome back, everyone, to Pontos Fathom Press. This is our Pontos Fathom podcast, episode 9, continuing our month-long exploration of the exegesis of Philip K. Dick, front and center. This week, we're going to talk about the exegesis as it applies to some of Dick's works like Ubik, and also K.W. Jetter's Blade Runner sequels. He wrote Blade Runner 2, Replicant 9, wrote a number of sequels of Blade Runner. And also we'll do a little bit of reading from Android's Electronic Sheep. We'll talk about formations of the unconscious, and we'll talk a little bit about Freud's Butcher's Wife and the movies as well while we're at it. Yeah, so this week we'll talk about Ubik and the Blade Runner sequel books. And then next week, we'll focus on dystopia in Scanner Darkly. Shout out to Loud Sound Epicenter for was looking to do dystopia, and it's one of the topics we were going to talk about. So we'll do dystopia there. And also shout out to Dustin Pickering. He's also a publisher. So thanks a lot, guys, for your support. Okay, so let's jump right into the exegesis. Quick shout out to Flowing the Tears of the Flesh Android, the curiously short Occupancy of Obiden. Definitely Dick inspired and William S. Burroughs inspired, a la the Death Dwarf. Check those out in the links. You can support us that way. Also growing the channel, so your subscription, shares, likes, subscribes all help. And would love to get into the conversation with you in the comments, so please join in. And let's get into it. So first of all, exegesis. In our podcast 8, we kind of gave an overview of the 2374 event, but maybe we'll just hear from Dick himself with a quick reference out to KW here. So I'm just reading here. It says, in my 6.5 years of working on my exegesis, I have often said, I have found it. I don't want to do that one more time. One in an endless series of failure. It seems almost as if saying it causes it to permutate into some other explanation. But I do think that night I was talking on the phone to KW and realized that in 374 I experienced medieval vertical, which is to say Gothic space. Medieval vertical space, which is to say Gothic. And this meant that I had ontologized reality in terms of medieval use of space, time, and causality. And hence Valis was God or Christ. It is the same. I think I had it, that the vast volume of vertical space that I experienced in 374, as well as the transformations in time, as if I were seeing down a time axis extending thousands of years, meant that I had abreacted to the medieval worldview, and within that theophany was logical, i.e. possible. So here's a quick shout out to KW. Quick shout out to that vertical time, that medieval time, the vaulted cathedrals, the cants of the monks, Hildegard von Bingen kind of things. So yeah, I want to kind of go into that Ubik space, right? So let's talk a little bit about Ubik. First of all, another shout out here where Dick mentions Ubik in the exegesis. So, as you know, while he was writing the exegesis, he was sort of looking back through his writings and noticing very interesting things that he came up with. There's another shout out to KW as well, but he says, I totally missed the point, nature of how and how much the axe message was degraded as an input signal message. What did I expect? The word gubble? Here is the verbal degrading, delineating exactly how the situation had deteriorated. It was not just noise on the line, but specific, meaningful recontouring. And this condition called imperial uniformity by KW and me is entropy, which for the brain means a literal but localized death of a part of itself. And so it took immediate steps to rectify the situation by breaking the warp factor of the complex, the BIP, the Black Iron Prison. Just as it gave me new life, personality, a la Ubik, it gave our world new life. So this is just really interesting. Then he jumps to say it probably is the once man we knew as Christ. The once man we knew as Christ. But here he says this very interesting things. He says this idea of the degraded input signal message. The degraded input signal message. Now let's hold that in place. So there's an idea of coming up with that degraded message, right? And let's kind of jump into Ubik for a second here. So, by the way, these are fantastic copies of the collected novels of Dick. And I want to kind of go into... So, in chapter 2 of Ubik, and spoilers here if you haven't read it, but go and read it. Stop the video, go read it, then come back. So, in Ubik, there's a scene where Runcitor is visiting his wife Ella in Coldpack. Okay, so you have here upright in her transparent casket, cased in an effluvium of icy mist, Ella Runcitor lay with her eyes shut, her hands lifted permanently towards her impassive face. It had been 3 years since he had seen Ella, and of course she had not changed. She never would. Now, at least not in the outward physical way. But with each resurrection into active life, into a return of cerebral activity, however short, Ella died somewhat. The remaining time left to her pulse phased out and ebbed. So the idea here is Ella's in Coldpack, which is sort of this device that's in Ubik. It's a way that you can suspend your dead loved ones or near dead loved ones. And then you could wake them up, spin them up, and talk to them, right? So here he says, so he hadn't talked to her for 3 years. And Runcitor had this kind of pact with his wife that if there was ever a big moment, he would go consult her at Coldpack, right? So it says, in the earphone words, slow and uncertain forms circular thoughts of no importance. How does it feel? How did it feel to be in half-life? He could never fathom it from what Ella told him, the basis of it, the experience of it, could really be transmitted. Gravity, she had told him, once it began not to affect you and you float more and more. When half-life is over, she said, I think you float out of the system, out to the stars. But she didn't know either, and she only wondered and conjectured. Unhappy or she felt it. Hi, Ella, he said clumsily into the microphone. Oh, her answer came in his ear. And yet, of course, her face remained stable. Nothing showed. He looked away. Hello, Glenn, she said, with a sort of childish wonder. What? She hesitated. How much time has passed? A couple of years. Tell me what's going on. Ah, Christ, he said. Everything's going to pieces, the whole organization. So he starts going into what their problems are, and he starts telling her while she's in Coldpack some of these complications that he has. And he's asking her some questions, and he's kind of going on and on. She says, and this one part that's very strange, because he is talking to her about this, this thing. He's like, oh yeah, it's been some time since I've seen you. Yeah, you want to avoid it, clears. Listen, now we got problems. You feel up to hearing about it? I mean, I don't want to overtax you or anything. Just say if you're too tired, if there's something else you want to hear about or discuss. It's so weird, I think. I've been dreaming all this time since you last talked to me. Is it really 2 years? Do you know, Glenn, what I think? I think that other people who are around me, we seem to be progressively growing together. A lot of my dreams aren't about me at all. Sometimes I'm a man, and sometimes I'm a little boy. Sometimes I'm an old fat woman with varicose veins. I'm in a place I've never seen, doing things that make no sense. Well, like I said, you're heading for a new womb to be born out. That smoky red light, that's a bad womb. You don't want to go there. That's humiliating. Hey, he said, changing the subject, let me tell you what's happening, what made me come out here and bother you. So Del Melopone has dropped out of sight. A moment of silence, and then Ella laughed. Who or what is S. Dol Melopone? There can't be such a thing. She laughed, the unique and familiar warmth of the laugh. Maybe you had forgotten. I hadn't forgotten. I wouldn't have forgotten S. Dol Melopone. Is it like a hobbit? It's Raymond Hollis' top telepath. We've at least one inertial sticking close to him, and ever since Gigi Ashwood first scouted him a year and a half ago. We never lose Melopone. So they're starting to talk about telepaths, and she says, and he's going on, and he's like, as I can tell, Melopone is bad money, Psi. Does it make you feel better or less? He waited. Ella? He said in silence. Nervously said, hey, hello there. Ella? Can you hear me? Is something wrong? Oh God, he thought, she's gone. A pause. And then the thoughts materialized in his right ear. My name is Jory. Not Ella's thoughts. A different elan, more vital and yet clumsier, without her deft subtlety. Get off the line, Runster said in panic. I was talking to my wife, Ella. Where did you come from? I am Jory, the thoughts came, and no one talks to me. I'd like to visit with you a while, mister, if that's okay with you. What's your name? Stammering, Runsiter said, I want my wife, Mrs. Ella Runsiter. I paid to talk to her. That's who I want to talk to, not you. I know Mrs. Runsiter, the thought clanged in his ear, much stronger now. She talks to me, but it isn't the same somebody like you talking to me, somebody in the world. Mrs. Runsiter is here where we are. It doesn't count because she doesn't know any more than we do. What year is it, mister? Did they send that big ship to Proxima? I'm very interested in that. Maybe you can tell me. And if you want, I can tell Miss Runsiter on later, okay? Runsiter popped the plug from his ears, hurriedly down the earphone to the rest of the gadgetry. He left the stall, dust-saturated office, and roamed among the chilling caskets, looking for the number. Moratorium employees swam up before him and then vanished as he turned on, searching for the owner. Is something the matter, Mr. Runsiter? The von Vogelsang person said, observing him as he floundered about. Can I assist you? I've got something coming over the wire, Runsiter panted, halting. Instead of Ella, damn you guys and your shoddy business practices. This shouldn't happen. What does it mean? He followed over to the moratorium officer, who had already started the directions of Office 2A. If I ran my business this way, did the individual identify himself? Yeah, he called himself Jory. Frowning with the obvious worry. That would be Jory Miller. I believe he's located next to your wife in the bin. But I can see it's Ella. After prolonged proximity, Van Vogelsang explained, there are occasionally a mutual osmosis, a suffusion between the mentalities of half-lifers. Jory Miller's cephalic activity is particularly good. Your wife's is not. That makes for an unfortunately one-way passage of protophasons. Can you correct it? Runsiter asked hoarsely. He found himself still spent, still panting and shaking. Get that thing out of my wife's mind and get her back. That's your job. Von Vogelsang said in a stilted voice. If its condition persists, your money will be returned to you. Who cares about the money? Snort the money. They had reached Office 2A now. Runsiter unsteadily reseated himself. If you don't get this jury person off the line, he half gasped, half snarled. I'll sue you. I'll close down this place. Facing the casket, Von Vogelsang pressed the audio outlet to his ear and briskly spoke into the microphone. Phase out, Jory. That's a good boy. Glancing at Runsiter said, Jory passed at 15. That's why he has so much vitality. Actually, this has happened before. Jory has shown up several times where he shouldn't be. One more in the microphone, he said. This is very unfair of you, Jory. Mr. Runsiter has come a long way to talk to his wife. Don't dim her signal, Jory. It's not nice. I know her signal is weak. Again, he listened solemn and frog-like, and he removed the earphone. What did he say, Runsiter said. Will he get out of there and let me talk to Ella? There's nothing Jory can do. Think of 2 AM radio transmitters, one close but limited to 500 watts of operating power, then another far off but has 5,000 watts. When night comes, and night, Runsiter says, has come, at least for Ella and maybe for himself as well. So anyway, that's just a quick, that bit of half-life politics and the way Dick pushes us into that space, right? He pushes us into that strange space. I really wanted to call that out there, and I think it's you can see where in his exegesis later, where he's looking at his own visions in that medieval vaulted space. You know, he takes us down. First, there's the concept of the sleeping dead who are still awake, and then there's down another layer. And then as Ubik goes on, obviously, you know, who's really in Kolpak and all the things that happen with the time shifts in Ubik are even more profound. But I wanted to call out that one space I believe that there's another interesting part here where he talks about Ubik. He says, one fascinating aspect of the Ubik is disclosed when the question is asked, where did I get the idea? The origin of the idea, in contrast to virtually all other novels, is evident from the text of the novel itself, although one must extrapolate from Runcitor to whatever Runcitor represents, and the state of Coldpack to whatever state we are in. In the novel, information spontaneously intrudes into the world of the characters, indicating that their world is not what they think it is. In fact, it indicates that their world is not even there at all. Some kind of world is there, but not the one they are experiencing. That time regression is put forth in the novel, and that time regression figured in my 374 experience. This still baffles me. The principle underlying the reversion of the objects along the form axis in the novel is explained by the references to Plato's theory of ideal forms, and I guess that applies to our world or my own. If Runcitor is God and Joe Chip and the other inertials are analogs to all men, then the regressed world is the ham in the sandwich, and as in Ubik must be abolished, as in Gnosticism. This is accomplished in Ubik by the revelation of the esoteric knowledge about their condition by a deity-like entity living behind even Runcitor, i.e. Ubik. It is this knowledge, not just information but gnosis, revealed to them, especially to Joe Chip, which makes them aware of their real condition. So we see this resemblance between Ubik and the Gnostic cosmology, right? But we're talking, if you rule out Soviet experiments with Choosy or Candy or forget the Eucharist, telosophy, the gnosis slipping through reality of the world as illusion, concealing another, but real world. What an aggregate message those three novels sum up, which is, he's talking about Ubik, Stigmata, here. So again, so this is kind of, Ubik as logos, Ubik as, something that's impressive. Now, at the same time, Dick's medieval layering that he talks about, this medieval layering that he senses, this weird vaulted axis of time, and Ubik continues the axis. It keeps dropping us, like we just drop and drop and drop and drop and drop in Ubik. And then you realize when you get back to the top again, he's pulled some Gnostic cosmology with us inside of his Ubik universe. But we have this same kind of dynamic at play psychologically in Blade Runner. I mean, in Blade Runner, it's made very apparent in the films. But in Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, I just wanted to call out this quick mention of Voigt-Kampf. Well, hey, before we go to Voigt-Kampf, let me do this. Let's talk about Blade Runner 2, The Edge of Human by K.W. Jeter. So, Blade Runner 2 is a sequel not related to Blade Runner 2049. So we all know Blade Runner film and Blade Runner 2049. But Jeter wrote Blade Runner 2 before those movies were made and kind of brought together a lot of what was cool about Dick. And it's almost an homage to Dick. It's fan service to fans of the movie, and it's fan service to fans of Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep. I think it's a great set of books. I think K.W. Jeter is a great writer. I first found out about K.W. Jeter when I was going to Boston University and was living with Santiago and bike messaging, and I think he had the paperback of Dr. Adder by K.W. Jeter in his courier bag. So shout out to Santiago in Minneapolis. And okay, so let's jump into this one. So so K.W. Jeter, always very fascinating writer on his own. Has done the works on Morlocks, really cool stuff. So again, I want you guys to read these. He has Blade Runner 2 and Blade Runner Replicant Night are the two that I've read. But in Blade Runner 2, it starts out where we're following up with Deckard. So, at the end of Blade Runner, Deckard escapes with Rachel. But here we have a scene right in the beginning of the book, which is kind of like a cold pack with Deckard and Rachel as opposed with Runciter and Ella. So you see, honey, I'm home. Okay, so he's talking about the coffin. Silence except for the smaller creatures that creep beneath the mat of dead leaves and pine needles beneath his feet. He goes up to the cabin. Honey, I'm home. It was a bad joke. The silence inside your head was the same. Why don't you put the gun to your head? Just as funny. He pushed the plank door open, and there it was, the black coffin. Okay? But instead he slept alone, except for his own hand pressed against the machine's cold metal, as though he could feel through the layers of microcircuitry. The glaciated pulse of her heart, hearing the sighing breaths that took hours to complete. Once, nearly a year ago, he pulled the cabin's rickety wooden chair beside the coffin, sat and watched the imperceptible motion of her breast rising with the microscopic pace of her oxygen intake, holding himself as still as possible. There, that's better. She was still sleeping and drifting as he left her. She would be until she woke up, not with a kiss, but a minute adjustment inside the coffin's control panel. Let's see how you're doing. Yeah, you're a riot, all right. All right, he murmured, as though leaning to the absolute darkness to find a kiss. I'll take care of them for you. With one fingertip, he brought the LED numbers to what he thought they should be and closed the panel. On the wall above the coffin, he hung a calendar that had been left behind by the cabin's previous occupants, whoever they'd been. When he and Rachel had come to this place, there hadn't even been spiders in the ancient webs along the ceiling. The calendar was way out of date, 2 decades old, a faded hollow shot of the Millennium celebratory riots in New York's Times Square. It didn't matter. All he used it for was to mark off the days, the interval that the still rational part of his head had ordained, until the next time he'd wake her up. At first it had been every month, her long sleep broken for a full day, 24 hours of conscious life, time together, real time. Everything else was waiting for him, even more than her. At least she could sleep through her dying. He didn't have that luxury. Then it was every 2 months, for 12 hours, a decision they both made, the grim economy of her death. No, he thought, mine. He stood back up, the calendar's numbers black beneath the ecstasy scroll of the half-charred scrap from the wood stove, stood in neat graveyard rows on the curling pages. 2.5 weeks until the next time. Restless, he walked outside the cabin again. A voice spoke. So what happens next is I'll give you the spoiler, but while his Rachel, the replicant Rachel, is asleep in this cold pack coffin, the real Rachel, the real niece of Tyrell, comes in, and they end up having an affair together. So what I love about this, though, is I love how it sets us up in the stitching together. I mean, it's a fan service for sure, but it's also, it stitches us into that world. You know, when Dick's talking about that horizontal axis, it's very easy for us to fall into the world where Ubik is real, right? And Jeter borrows this, and I think it's really fascinating. You know, and I want to talk about our reactions to this a bit by just reading this passage from Freud about the butcher's wife. Okay, so again, this is Lacan's Formations of the Unconscious, and he's talking about the dream of the butcher's beautiful wife. Okay, it is at this point that Freud introduces the text of the dream that bears another interpretation, one that enters into the dialectic of identification. Let's keep on reading, and I want to pursue to the end this very important point. It's a short one which first clearly articulates by Freud what hysterical information signifies. He spells out its meaning. I will leave out several lines as to not go on too long. The process of hysterical identification, he says, is a little more complicated than the common picture of hysterical imitation. It consists in the unconscious drawing of an inference, as an example will make clear. Supposing a physician is treating a woman patient who is a subject to a particular kind of spasm in a hospital ward among a number of other patients. He will show no surprise if he finds one morning that his particular kind of hysterical attack has found imitators. But the psychical infection has occurred along some such lines as these. As a rule, patients know. You have to be aware of the importance that such a remark carries. I'm not saying something at the time at which it was made, but for us still, more about one another than the doctor does of them. And after the doctor's visit is over, they turn their attention to one another, like Rory in the Cold Pack with Ella, right? And now the doppelganger of Rachel, right? And also the Jetter's work talking with Ubik, right? There's a sort of a mimesis going on there, right? A mimetic theory going on there. Let us imagine that this patient had her heart attack on a particular day. And it goes on talking about the butcher's wife. Let's just go to the butcher's wife section here. So, the butcher's wife. Okay, so here's the explanation. So Freud continues, I admit that at first sight it seemed sensible and coherent, but it looked like the reverse of wish fulfillment. In the dream, there's a woman we shall call the butcher's beautiful wife. Here is the dream, Freud says. I wanted to give a supper party, but I had nothing in the house but a little smoked salmon. I thought I would go out and buy something, but remembered then that it was Sunday afternoon and all the shops would be shut. Next, I tried to ring up some caterers, but the telephone was out of order, so I had to abandon my wish to give a supper party. That's the text of the dream. Freud scrupulously notes the manner in which the text of the dream is verbalized, and it's on the basis of this verbalization, a kind of written text of the dream, that the analysis of the dream always and only seems conceivable to him. I answered, of course, so this is Lacan talking about Freud, talking about the dream to his patient. I answered, of course, that analysis was the only way of deciding on the meaning of the dream. In fact, the patient had contradicted him with this dream, saying, you're always saying to me that a dream is a fulfilled desire. Here I have the greatest difficulty fulfilling my desire. Lacan tells us, Freud continues, I admitted that at first sight it seemed sensible and coherent, when you look at the reverse of a wish fulfillment. But that material that the dream arises from, as you know, the instigation to a dream is always to be found in the events of the previous day. Analysis. My patient's husband, an honest and capable wholesale butcher, had remarked to her the day before that he was going too stout and therefore intended to start a course of weight reduction. He proposed to rise early, do physical exercise, keep to a strict diet, and above all, accept no more invitations to supper. She laughingly added that her husband at the place where he regularly lunched had made the acquaintance of a painter, who had pressed him to be allowed to paint his portrait, as he had never seen such expressive features. Her husband, however, had replied in his blunt manner that he was obliged, but he was sure the painter would prefer a piece of a pretty young girl's behind to the whole of his face. And she was very much in love with her husband now, and she teased him a lot, and she begged him not to give away her caviar. What did it mean? She had wished for a long time that she could have a caviar sandwich every morning, but had grudged the expense, or rather she didn't grant herself the license to have this caviar sandwich. Of course, her husband would have let her have it at once if she had asked him, but on the contrary, she had asked him not to give her any caviar, so that she could go on teasing him about it. Right? So the idea is she wants the caviar sandwich, but she asks not to get it so that she can keep on desiring having it, right? Right? So you see where this is going, right? This explanation struck me as unconvincing. Inadequate reasons like this usually conceal unconfessed motives. They remind me of Burnham's hypnotized patients, when one of those carries out a post-hypnotic suggestion and is asked why he's asking this way. Instead of saying that he has no idea, he feels compelled to invent some kind of obviously unsatisfactory reason. It's true with my patient, the caviar. I saw that she was obliged to create an unfulfilled wish for herself in her actual life, and the dream represented this renunciation as having been put effect. But why was it that she stood in need of an unfulfilled dream? So Freud gets to us to the point with the butcher's wife. why did her dream reflect the wish of an unfulfilled wish, right? So the further parenthetical remarks by Freud and Lacan tells us, the associations which she had so far produced had not been sufficient to interpret the dream. I pressed her for some more, and from short pause, such as would correspond to the overcoming of her resistance, she went on to tell me that the day before, she visited a friend whom she confessed she felt jealous because her, my patient's husband, was constantly singing her praises. Fortunately, this friend of hers was skinny and thin, and her husband admires a plumper figure. And I asked her why she had talked about her thin friend. Naturally, she replied, that of the lady's wish to grow a little stouter. When are you going to ask for us to another meal? You always feed one so well. The meaning of the dream was now clear, and I was able to say to the patient, it's just as though that she made the suggestion you said to yourself, a likely thing. I'm going to come and eat in my house so that you may get stout and attract my husband even more. I'd rather never give another supper party. When the dream was saying to you that it was unable to give supper parties, this was fulfilling your wish not to help your friend to grow plumper. The fact that what people eat at parties makes them stout and had brought home to your husband's decision not to accept any more invitations to supper in the interest of the plan to reduce his weight. The salmon in the dream had not yet been accounted for. How, I asked, did you arrive at the salmon that came to your dream? Oh, she replied, smoked salmon is my friend's favorite dish. It happened to be acquainted with the lady in question. I can confirm the fact that she grudges herself salmon no less than my patient grudges herself caviar. So here you have this strange idea of lack. Okay, the idea of Lacanian lack here is what the desire is. The desire is the lack, that space that's opened up. And what I think is fascinating, not only in the exegesis, but the way Ubik, now you notice in that psychological story, we've got Lacan telling us about Freud, Freud telling us about the butcher's wife, who's telling us about a dream, who then we get down into her unconscious, right? And it's this, again, back to Dick, it's access to the Gothic medieval vaulted ceiling, the layers that one sees. And again, when Dick calls out to the Gnostic Logos, right? That's that Gnostic Logos, that's the descending down. And here we see psychoanalytically, when we're exploring the unconscious, we find that. But at the same time, what do we reach when we get to the unconscious? Well, the scary thing is, in Ubik, we found Rory was sort of doing some cross-chatter with Ella, right? And then we have, in a weirder manifestation, Jetter's Blade Runner 2, we have the copy in Cold Pack, and then the real. So who's the real and who's the copy, right? Deckard ends up having an affair with the real Rachel, who's named Sarah, I believe. And I think that's right. Let me know in the comments if I got that wrong. But, he's in love with Rachel, but here's a copy of Rachel who's alive, and she seduces him. And it's sort of like that weird flipping out of the layers kind of comes here. So Jetter's work is like this, though. It's very rich in giving us all those components that we love from the movies and the books. And he does it in a very, very fantastic way. I mean, I want to call out quickly here to do Android's Dream of Electronic Sheep. And this is where we hear quickly about Voigt-Kampf. So we have Deckard here reflecting. He's talking to Bryant at the headquarters. Harry still wants a Nexus 6 brain unit withdrawn from the market. He felt no surprise. Since the initial release of its specifications and performance charts back in August of '91, most police agencies which dealt with escaped Andes had been protesting. The Soviet police can't do any more than we can, he said. Legally, the manufacturers of the Nexus 6 brain unit operated under colonial law, their parent auto factory being on Mars. We better just accept the new unit as a fact of life. So again, we have this cross into the Mars aspect, the off-world colonies. But it says, over 50 of the T-14 androids, he recalled, that had made their way, or one means or another, to Earth, and had not been detected for a period of, in some cases, up to an entire year. But then the Voigt-Empathy test had been devised by the Pavlov Institute, working in the Soviet Union, and no T-14 android, insofar at least as was known, had managed to pass that particular test. Want to know what the Russian police said? I know that too, her freckled orange face glowed. I'll find out from Bryant, Deckard said. And then it goes on to say, a moment's reading vindicated Miss Marston's statement. The Nexus 6 did have 2 trillion constituents, plus a choice within a range of 10 million possible combinations of cerebral activity. In 0.45 of a second, an android equipped with such a brain structure could assume any one of the 14 basic reaction postures. Well, no intelligence test would trap an Andy, but then intelligence tests hadn't trapped an Andy in years, not since the primordial crude varieties of the 70s. The Nexus 6 android types, reflected, surpassed several classes of human specials in terms of intelligence. In other words, androids equipped with the new Nexus 6 brain unit had, from a sort of rough, pragmatic, no-nonsense standpoint, evolved beyond a major but inferior segment of mankind. More human than human, right? They've evolved. For better or worse, the servant had in some cases become more adroit than his master. But new scales of achievement, for example, the Voigt-Kampf empathy test, had emerged as criteria by which to judge. An android, no matter how gifted as a pure intellectual capacity, could make no sense out of the fusion which took place routinely among the followers of Mercurism. And he experienced virtually everyone else, including subnormal chickenheads, managed with no difficulty. So basically, just kind of talking about how Voigt-Kampf could route out the replicant mind, okay? So, again, just like in the Ubik example, and just like in Freud pulling the truth out of the dream, Voigt-Kampf is going in there and trying to, even when the replicant is more human than human, Voigt-Kampf somehow is able to do. But what is Voigt-Kampf really doing, right? What is it really doing? Is it in the unconscious? Back to the Ubik space and back to the exegesis, Freud has that famous statement that the dreams are like the river Acheron, right? So they're dreams, and a lot of psychology talks about surfacing the unconscious, right? So where the unconscious becomes this ripe field. And you see in Dick's exegesis itself that Dick is having this, except not with his unconscious, but with the whole world. It's like the whole world's come undone. And when he looks back to his works like Ubik, he says, this is what I was on about. I was on about when the world for the Runsitter's employees, who are actually in a cold pack, it starts to disintegrate and time starts to reverse itself. And, and maybe in Dick's exegesis, he talks about when he starts to see or feel the BIP, right? The Black Iron Prison kind of thing. I think it's a relevant to the same space as what the Voigt-Kampf is really doing. So let's go into K.W. Jedder's other book, Replicant Night. Again, another fantastic book. I liked two better, but this one is very bizarre. It's very surreal. It's almost Dada-esque in that it pulls in more Dick tropes into it. They go to Mars. But the greatest trope of it is when they're actually filming a movie about Blade Runners. So it's like a Hollywood set in the Blade Runner universe, okay, where actors are playing Deckard, Holden, etc. So we've got this great scene where the real David Holden, recovered from his shooting by Leon in Blade Runner, is on the movie set, right? So there's a movie set and they're filming a version of Blade Runner, right? So and you have it quickly. It's like so Dave Holden's out of the hospital. He's been rebuilt, and He saw the buildings up ahead, at least part of them, the bottom sections of what were supposed to be LA's canyon towers, false fronted and propped into position by the cobbled together framework behind them. Not seeing again the city he had left behind on Earth, or the views that it had in the partial disassembly. It looked better this way, thought Holden, not fake at all. That was the marvel of it. As the people who were in these shadowy corporations and architects who built the outer Hollywood station and constructed the LA set inside it had caught some realer-than-real aspects of the city. Or at least a city that existed inside Holden's mind, which he barely became aware of until now. I'd always thought about the other one was fake, he realized now. To see it this way, two-dimensional. So he's saying, I always thought that the real city looked fake, but seeing it this way, the two-dimensional buildings with nothing behind their surfaces, retrofitted ventilation ducts and wiring conduits, with people in the streets finally exposed as actors and anonymous bit players, with the monsoon rains shut off from above, the rusting pipes leaking only a few scattered drops. If only this were true. It was an oddly comforting manifestation of his most paranoid dreamings. Okay, so Holden's on set. When he got through past the doors which Deckard had vanished, there was no sound of the footsteps. Holden could see the faint buzzing of the fluorescent panels lining the narrow corridors. Well, he's got to be around here somewhere. Holden looked down the double row of frontless doorways. A fine layer of dust had drifted in their sills. The briefcase had its own version of them. There's somebody coming, it announced. I can feel them, but it's not. The briefcase suddenly clammed up. What are we doing here? Basically the briefcase is talking to him. Kind of like in Ubik again, where the door is talking to him, and he's trying to, Joe Chip trying to, argue with the door about the coin, right? He's going to put the coin in the door, and he's out of money, and he's trying to scam the door. The door won't unlock for him. So now we've got, what are you doing here? Another voice, not Deckard's. Warning from the briefcase had given Holden the quarter second he needed to assemble a front. He glanced over his shoulder, and the figure standing in the just open doorway were behind him. I got called over to the set. Holden kept his voice modulated. Beats me, what for? The other man stepped forward and peered more close to him. Okay, the man took a slow nod. They must be talking about the office setup, the interview scene. It's not on the list for today. But what the hell? The disgusted shrug. This whole shoot's so screwed up. He clamped a hand on Holden's shoulder. The guy was at least half a head taller and steered him up down the hallway. Man, I don't even know if they're trying to make a movie here. His glance went down the briefcase dangling from Holden's grip. Is that supposed to be it? The Voigt-Kampf or whatever? Voigt-Kampf. It didn't even take a split second for him to respond. Sure, lied Holden. You got it. The other man was obviously operating on the assumption that Holden was connected to the video production some way. One of the actors? He wondered if there was some support that Holden was, as well as Deckard, is in this thing. Is there a scene where Holden, as well as Deckard, is in this thing? Whatever. He wasn't about to contradict the guy and get his cover blown. That's what it is, all right. Doesn't look the way I thought it would. The other man frowned at the briefcase in Holden's hand. So Holden's holding a real Voigt-Kampf machine in his briefcase. And the guy on the set says, it doesn't look like what I thought it would. The other man frowned at the briefcase in Holden's hands. But it'd be typical of them to tell the props people just to throw something together on the cheap. He's buying it, thought Holden. That was necessary now, is to keep the guy bullshitted, then find a way of giving him the slip and continuing the search for Deckard. This was the security that he'd been so worried about running into. The briefcase's voice would have skipped all the dire forebodings. In here, the other man pushed open the hallway, and Holden walked through. This is the set you're down for. They wouldn't need you out on the big one. As his eyes adjusted to the dim space, Holden found himself standing in the middle of what looked like a small office, with a couple of high-backed chairs facing each other across the table. Something fluttered above his head. He looked up and saw the blades of a ceiling fan turning lazily in the room's air. Beyond the fan and the narrow plank which was fastened, there was nothing but the studio's empty reaches, studded with gantries and walkways, lights extinguished as blind eyes. Stay put, the other man said. I'll go get the rest of the crew. Maybe I should go along, Holden lifted the briefcase with both hands, instead of just waiting here. Suddenly, the irrational panic had sped up the biomech heart in his chest, so Holden's got a replacement heart. He could feel his pulse bouncing off the briefcase's leatherette flank. Forget that, the other man's voice harsher. I don't want you wandering off while we're trying to round up everybody. Just sit and relax. Just wait a minute. When the other men had left, the briefcase spoke up. Way to go. The voice was tinged with familiar sarcasm. Door's locked, isn't it? Holden gave the knob a futile twist, but didn't bother to get an answer. Hefting the briefcase onto the table, he pulled back one of the chairs and lowered himself into it. Across from the chairs, they spelled out Tyrell Corporation. A memory stirred uneasily in the darker space inside his head, and from a long time ago, back when he had a real flesh and blood heart ticking, and lungs ticking, and sighing under his breastbone. Most likely, the memory sat ostensibly in his skull. 2 chairs that said Tyrell Corp, and slowly revolving ceiling fan. There was smoke, Holden remembered. Cigarette smoke, drifting blue, hanging like some transparent snakeskin in the air. From the cigarette that had been given his own, he had been smoking then. He had given it up after the time he got new heart and lungs. The doctors told him that his system had reached its limit. And there he is sitting in front of the table in front of him, not a briefcase, but an actual Voigt-Kampf machine, regulated LAPD issue, just like the big black guns that Blade Runners carried around with them. The Voigt-Kampf had been opened and activated, its bat-wing bellows compressing and expanding. So, and it goes on, right? So what's great about this is, so we've got a scene where Holden is undercover, kind of, on the set of the Blade Runner movie, and he's actually sitting back down in the place where he had been shot, except now he doesn't have a real heart. He has a fake heart. You just gotta love K.W. Jedder's twisting, like just twisting of the reality, right? Just, it's like, it's definitely replicating, right? It's replicating, but it does it with such a twist, and it hits all the right notes, right? He does it on and on, like each paragraph hits the note where he says, L.A. seemed fake, but this weird off-world Martian movie set of L.A. with its fake, like a Western facades with the fake backdrop seemed more real to him. And he's questioned about the Voigt-Kampf suitcase that he has, and the production employee kind of makes a comment like, oh, it looks like a cheap knockoff, when it's actually the real one. And then he sits down in the scene where Leon would shoot him, and so on and so on. But you can kind of see again, this is great stuff for Jedder, really in tune with those topics that Dick was talking about, with that medieval vaulted ceiling, right? And these, I guess this might be a good enough place to leave it. But the idea here is, you get to build that anxiety a bit. You get to build that volume, right? They're building this volume, and Dick calls it, again, that medieval sense of Gothic space, which is space-time, And it crosses from not only the unconscious to the dream space, but from the narrative space. It crosses authors, and it crosses into the weird corners of paranoia where Exegesis talks a lot about, right, as in Ubik, we don't know what the world is, right? What's going on in Cold Pack? Like, what kind of experience is Cold Pack? And then as he jumps out of this and comes to the Exegesis, he says, isn't that what's happening in the real world? The BIP, right? This is what the Gnostics were on about. And I find that this turning of the problem, this vaulting the ceilings, this finding ways that you can keep finding more space fractally, pouring inside of it. Let's end up with the opening statement where Dick was talking about he doesn't want to say I've got it and then find out that there's more. Well, there's always more because it's fractal, right? And I think this is where surfacing it and experiencing it is one thing, right? Flowing the tears of it is one thing. Like the flowing part of it is what's really happening, right? It's passing through the senses, right? The real Rachel shows up while the replicant Rachel is in Cold Pack, right? Jedder writes about Cold Pack, and there's Cold Pack. Jedder brings in Mars as the off-world and the Martian aspects of Dick, right? And then, the butcher's wife's caviar, the wanting of the lack, right? it's almost as if the closer, Dick says, the closer we get to naming it, the further it is. So the butcher's wife, she doesn't want him to ever give her the caviar sandwich. She wants to long for having it. And I think that's maybe a good place to leave us with the exegesis, where, you can't, it's a case of where you can't summarize something, you have to just experience it maybe, right? So anyway, hope you enjoyed this week's episode. Please give a comment below, and we will talk to you next week, where we will continue our exegesis of Philip K. Dick, and we'll talk about A Scanner Darkly, dystopia, anxiety, and this idea of history, where dystopia and history again kind of gets into that confusion space. Is it just anxiety about history? Is anxiety about the future really an anxiety about history hasn't been told to me the correct way? And if that's the case, then the future is uncertain and the past is uncertain, and that kind of anxiety space is really what dystopia is about. But it's also, in a way, how history is almost dystopian as well. And there's a bit of Hegel in there, I think, for next week. So thanks a lot. Join the conversation in the comments below or on our Patreon. And thank you for making it this far. I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.